everyone, and welcome to No Off Season, presented by Amazon Business. I'm Zena.
I'm Sabreena Merchant.
And I'm Ben Pickman.
Today on the show, it was quite a weekend in the WNBA. Caitlin Clark is back, baby, and Angel Reese made history, and the Lynx did what they've done. They stood up and they spoke out, and we've got thoughts. Then Ben is joined by a very special guest, one of the people responsible for bringing you Big Ellie, not the small one. If you were ever curious as to how Ellie came to be and how she became an icon, look no further. And then after that, I got two takes and a fake. We'll see if they can figure out which one is real. All right, Ben, you were on the road as always, and you got to finally see a good game in person. The basketball gods were kind to you. Tell us about the game you watched.
The basketball gods were very kind to me, Zena. I was in Indianapolis for Fever against the New York Liberty. Caitlin Clark's return after 3 weeks away, having dealt with that quad strain. And, setting the scene, people always flock to Fever games early. There's always a lot of energy outside early, and especially so on this Saturday afternoon, really for two reasons. Number one, I think the fans just needed to cheer about something because the game was literally 12 hours after the Pacers had lost in Game 4 of the WNBA Finals. So inside the
NBA
arena,
Finals.
NBA Finals, right? It's true, NBA Finals. Inside the arena, there were still all these stickers and things up on the wall and some signage related to the NBA Finals. So that caught my eye. And number two, Kahleah Clark was back. And so, they had grown used to, she had signed autographs. She was taking selfies pregame. It still had all that hype. But then she got on the floor, and, one of the first things that struck me was literally in the first couple minutes, every time she touched the basketball, brought it up the court, grabbed a rebound, fans just started to cheer. They were just so excited to see her out there, to see her playing. And that doesn't even get to what happened at the end of the first quarter when she buries those 3 threes in 38 seconds, all, well beyond the three-point arc. And it was wow. Caitlin Clark is back. That was literally Stephanie White's words. She described it as the wow moment. And, we can get into that game some, but the scene was pretty electric from there on out.
I can imagine that final score ended up being the same thing, 102-88, Indiana's favor, of course. And watching Caitlin Clark, it was surreal thinking she had missed 19 days. You could see she was huffing and puffing, but that was not impacting the way that she actually came out and incorporated her teammates. All I kept thinking as I watched that game is, damn, I know Indiana's happy. They're oh, we got our girl back, Sabreena. I know that they were happy to see her because especially, they've been needing some organization out on the court, but also this is a big game. They take down the undefeated Liberty. And now there are no more undefeated teams in the league. Talk a little bit about just that moment when Caitlin Clark hits that three over Breanna Stewart. And Breanna can't even do anything. Stewie's just this is ridiculous. And as they're coming back, even Caitlin pushed Stewie a little bit playfully. And they're just this is ridiculous. I cannot believe you're doing this.
Yeah, that was my favorite part of the game. Like you mentioned, she's on the right wing, good 5-6 feet behind the three-point line, as was the norm for most of her three-point attempts on Saturday's game. She hits the three over Stewie. Again, Stewie with the 7-foot wingspan. She hits the three over Stewie. She smiles at her, just sort of pokes her a little, and Stewie just can't help but laugh because this is what great players do, right? Stewie has been on the other side of that moment so many times, delivering to somebody else. And I just love the appreciation, right? Caitlin already seems to be on that level of someone who you can just dish with during the course of a game, who you can talk to. It was very fun to watch.
I actually asked Stewie about it. On Monday afternoon at practice. I was just what do you remember? What feedback have you gotten from friends, peers, teammates about that clip? Because I think everyone really saw that clip. And Stewie kind of walked me through it, just being I basically knew what move she was going to make. She's well beyond the three-point line. She knew that, she wants to go left, that step back is in her bag. And then Stewie was but what can you kind of do? As you're talking about, Sabreena, you just you tip your cap, basically, is what Stewie said. And then, the laughing was just this organic moment between the two of them. And Stewie kind of made a joke that everyone's kind of being a good sport about it. It was a great play on both sides. And look, Indiana gets the final laugh of the game. But I will say, there's no reason, not that anyone is clowning Breanna Stewart for her defense on that play, but Stewie ended up guarding Caitlin really the entire fourth quarter because New York has been playing without Leonie Fibic, who's at Eurobasket, and Caitlin did not score in the fourth quarter. Like, we saw some really, really, like, grade A defense from Breanna Stewart on Caitlin Clark in the fourth quarter. Just, of course, the play that everyone remembers is that step back for good reason. Stewie remembers it too.
Absolutely. And I'm happy you brought up Leonie Fibic being out, because obviously that impacts the size, the tree length size of what New York is typically. But if you looked at the Indiana side, like, Aaliyah Boston was the only post player that was really in the high levels of minutes in that game. She ended up playing 29 minutes, but even so, no other post player played over 15. Natasha Howard, Damaris Dantas, like, there was not a large presence on the floor in the first three quarters, particularly. What was going well for Indiana with that small ball lineup, Sabreena? And what was not necessarily going well for New York, especially with the absence of a Jonquel Jones and a Leonie Fibic?
Well, I mean, you hit on it. Like, when you don't have Jonquel Jones, when you don't have Leonie Fibic, it allows other teams to experiment more, right? Like, we see so many teams struggle against the size of the Liberty because they are so long and so big at every position, right? Like, Leonie Fibic is a 6'4" 2 guard. It's ridiculous, like, now she's playing the 3, with Natasha Cloud in there, but she can toggle between those positions. And Indiana just had a little bit more flexibility without JJ, without, like, I think Yara Sabli was still on a bit of a restriction too. So it was a much smaller New York team than you'd mostly see. And that allowed the Fever to play to their strengths, I think, which is they had one center on the court at all times. So that was 29 minutes of Aaliyah Boston and then about 11 of Damaris Dantas. And then they played some Natasha Howard, but they had a lot more success when Sophie Cunningham or Lexi Hull was that nominal power forward. And I think Sophie was a plus 28 or something during the course of that game, which single game plus minus, wow. Yeah, whatever. But plus 31 ended up being, my bad. Undersold Sophie Cunningham's accomplishments there. But yeah, I think I just like the way the Fever look when they can space the floor. Everybody's a shooting threat. Other than, the 4-out 1-in, and Aaliyah Boston can facilitate from the middle of the court. She had, I think, 6 assists during that game too. So it's just fun to watch Indiana play kind of more like the Pacers, right? Like a pace and space game where they just push the tempo and have a lot of guard skilled players on the court who can do things with the ball in their hands. And they don't play like that a ton because I feel like I've mentioned this a bunch of times. Indiana's roster has 6 bigs on it out of 11 players, which I don't understand why they did that during the offseason. But I like when they take advantage of all of their really talented perimeter players. Like, this was the first game where we got Sydney Colson playing as just another player, not like Caitlin Clark's backup, right? Like, she got to play 2 guard minutes next to Caitlin, or, she was the point guard and Caitlin was the off-ball guard. And I think leaning more into their perimeter players, more of their guards, it just looks more like what Caitlin wants to play, and I think what the Fever are going to be most successful at.
Sabreena, I have a quick trivia question for you based on the lineup stat of the Cunningham, Hull, Mitchell, Clark, and Boston. What do you think their net rating is this year, that 5-person group?
I feel like this is a trick question, but I'm going to say like plus 24.
How about plus 97.3
What in the world?
Per 100 possessions?
Whoa.
Now, how many minutes is that?
Now, it's only 11 minutes of sample, so it's admittedly a really small sample, and it speaks to just how dominant they were on Saturday afternoon. Just like Indiana going small really was, one of the adjustments that flipped that game in the third quarter. And, Sandy Brondello talked about it a little bit, on Monday afternoon too, to some reporters who were at Liberty practice. Like, they were not expecting necessarily Indy to go as small as they did because, as I mentioned, like, that's not a lineup they have trotted out. And what that did is it just makes it hard to matchup hunt in the same way, right? Because, like, you can suddenly switch screens. And we saw from New York, they got stagnant on the offensive end of the floor. Now, part of that is without JJ, who often is a stabilizing force that they can just dump the ball down into and let her, post up, pass out of the post. She can shoot over players. Like, she's such a matchup problem. We saw how important she was in flipping the first game between these two teams in that fourth quarter. Really, her play at the start of the period, I want to say she had 14 points in that first meeting in the fourth quarter alone, was why New York was able to come back. Without her, like, New York just got really, really stagnant, and playing against like this small, switchable, uber athletic lineup, it's just hard to just like find weaknesses, right? And that is exactly what we saw from the New York end, and what's what we saw from the Indy end. I think we've talked about it. Like, this is a lineup of playing Hull and Cunningham we want to see more and more as the season progresses. Obviously, Clark was her injury was the headliner when she went out, but Sophie Cunningham missed, I want to say, the last 4 or 5 games too, and getting her back is really consequential for the Indiana Fever for this reason, because now suddenly you have not only another ball handler, another shooter, but someone who can, guard up really 1 through 3, but can also switch on to 4s when the situation calls upon it. And so look, we've seen the success. We've seen it's a small sample. I'm just really curious, is Indiana going to lean into this lineup more going forward? Because we've seen the success of it, and there's no reason to suggest that it won't have as much success going forward, against teams they play.
Yeah, and just one more stat regarding that Indiana small lineup. I mean, they took 35 3-pointers in this game. I pointed it out in the piece that ran on The Athletic on Monday, but they hadn't taken even 30 3-pointers in any other game. And that just seems like malpractice to me when you have a player like Caitlin Clark who can create good 3-pointers basically on every single offensive possession. They should be getting the ball up from long range. So for them to at least, admittedly, they hit a lot of shots. It looks better when you hit the shots. But I think 30 plus is the range they should be thinking for the number of 3-pointers attempted anyway.
Yeah, leaning into the small ball lineup when you have majority post players on your team is going to be a task. I think Stephanie White is up to it. I think what was really interesting about that game, too, is that not only did they have shots going up from outside, the spacing perfectly allowed for Kelsey Mitchell's game to be on display because she's a penetrator. She gets to the rack, she gets into the paint, she gets fouled. And so it was this perfect balance between Caitlin Clark's gravity outside allowed open room for Kelsey Mitchell to play inside. Now, this was very important and impressive because this game nullified Breanna Stewart's 24 points and Sabreena Ionescu's 34 points. I mean, you'd forget that every time a shot went up, Sabreena had an answer. Sabreena Ionescu was up there just battling for her team, but they couldn't get anything out of, Kennedy Burke and Natasha Cloud and the rest of their crew. And so this is a really big win for Indiana, which kind of brings me into ranking standings, moving up the ladder. Yes, folks, I'm teasing it. It's Sabreena Scale time, folks. It's been a while. We didn't have it properly last week, and I know y'all were missing it. So we're back. We're back. We're here. Thinking with that game in mind, Sabreena, how do you think this game impacted the Fever's ranking for you? And particularly what part of that game stood out for you to move them up or down?
Well, I moved them up to 3, and they were, I think, 5th my standings last week. So, a little jump, which I was tried it a little bit for because they did go 1-1 last week, losing to the Atlanta during one of those games. But I like to think about exactly how they are in this moment. And with Caitlin back, it's just a really good team, and the way they played is exactly how I've been hoping Indiana is going to play for this season. Caitlin looks good, Aaliyah looks good, Kelsey looks good, and that big 3, offensively, is just about as good as any in the league. So I thought, it didn't seem right to move them ahead of Minnesota or New York because, again, those teams only suffered their first losses of the season this past week, and Indiana has a few more than that. But the ceiling that they can hit, with Caitlin, I think, is, right back in that home court advantage contender sphere that I'd hoped for at the start of the season. So that's what got them back to that level.
I'm really curious to see if Indiana's defense is going to withstand some of these other teams coming up for them. Because honestly, yes, their offense was on fire, but their defense was really good too against New York. But I don't know how much it was New York's personal attack on themselves from having a stagnant offense versus the defense of Indiana forcing them into, lower production.
I know we've talked about, Sabreena's power rankings, but we should also mention that the victory for the Fever was significant.
Scale.
Sorry,
Ben,
Sabreena Scale.
Put some respect on it. Thank you.
We should also acknowledge that the victory had legitimate implications from the actual standings, and specifically the WNBA Commissioner's Cup standings.
Does Ben consider those actual standings? Does he care about the Commissioner's Cup standings now?
It's a fair point. We'll have to save that for another episode, maybe the July 1 episode when the final takes place. But with the win, Indiana passed New York, leapfrog New York, who again had been undefeated, but now suddenly they're no longer the New York Liberty in the driver's seat to host this Commissioner's Cup final. And instead, here, this situation in the East, Atlanta plays New York on Tuesday. If Atlanta beats New York, Atlanta will win the East, the Commissioner's Cup standings, because Atlanta had defeated Indiana, as Sabreena mentioned, earlier in the week in the Commissioner's Cup play. If New York wins and beats Atlanta, and Connecticut beats Indiana, then New York is going to win the East. But if New York beats Atlanta and Indiana beats Connecticut, which is, some might say a likely outcome per the, gambling odds, at least going off Vegas lines, then Indiana would win the East. So even with Caitlin Clark missing the time that she did, if New York beats the Dream and the Fever beat Connecticut, all these games on Tuesday night, then Indiana would win the East. We should just say on the West, I can just run through the quick scenarios that really it's going to come down to Minnesota or Seattle. If Minnesota beats Las Vegas, Minnesota wins the West. If Minnesota loses to Vegas and Seattle loses to the Sparks, then Minnesota also wins the West. And if Minnesota loses to Vegas and Seattle beats the Sparks, then Seattle wins the West. So those are your kind of teams that are still up for grabs as it relates to Commissioner's Cup play and trying to make this championship game on July 1st.
Just speaking of Vegas odds, I think it is the biggest upset that you were the one to say that on the podcast and not me.
I will say this. This is the only time that standings East-West matter. Don't think about East-West when it comes to the playoffs, folks. Literally, the Commissioner's Cup is the only time you can actually look at the map and be like, oh, East versus West, okay? Just remember that. Thank you for that breakdown, Ben. I wanted to talk, let's keep talking through the Sabreena Scales. And Sabreena, I'm curious, Phoenix was interesting for me this week because Kahleah Copper came back. They got the win over the Aces, 76-70. And we talked about, we don't know what it's going to look like when Kahleah comes back into this mix. And is it better that, that they're trying to figure themselves out before Kahleah comes in? But now she's here. She's there. They got to win. What did you see in that game?
So we should specify this was a Vegas team that was missing Angel Wilson because she's in concussion protocol. So
Fair.
Good win
That's
in
true.
Las Vegas, but, without the reigning MVP. So that makes things easier, right? Especially like a team that doesn't really play traditional center. You don't miss that so much against Vegas when they don't have Angel Wilson. But I thought the most interesting thing about Kahleah Copper coming back was that it puts Sammy Wickham into a role that I think is a lot more familiar for her, which is this 6-woman microwave scorer off the bench. And she looked fantastic running that second
She was
unit.
microwaving.
Exactly, right?
She was doing it.
Yeah, so Kahleah, I think is going to take a little bit of time to get back to her full level. She looked good getting to the pull-up, right? Hit a few of those. Ends with 11 points. Physically looked right, which I think is the most important thing you're hoping for, somebody coming off of a knee surgery. But I think they've been doing this really strict Alyssa Thomas, Satu Sablé stagger just to make sure that there's somebody who can always control the offense on the court at any given time. To have Sammy on the bench too, I think really helps. Just a capable shooter running the 2-player game with Alyssa Thomas, you run a screen and roll there and 2 players go to Alyssa Thomas and there's Sammy Wickham, bam, just ready to take a deep 3. So I liked just the stability it gives the rest of their lineups too, right? We always talk about that injury, the knockdown effect is what changes everything, right? So Phoenix is quietly very deep. I mean, this is a huge mea culpa on my part. I did not anticipate all of these rookies having such an impact right away, but they have been awesome. And Sammy Wickham is the lone veteran presence. I think one of 3 players still born in the 80s who plays in WNBA right now. So kudos to Sammy Wickham. But I thought this setup for her in Phoenix makes a ton of sense.
I'm also dying because I think the Phoenix Mercury were the ones that set up one of their social media posts that's is being born in the 90s old or something like that. And I remember Catherine Westbeld being no comment. I'm not going to comment on this. Probably because she knows, 1, her age, but 2, her teammates' age and Sammy Wickham. But I love the way that they're looking, Ben.
Do you want to weigh in? When someone's old? On the old question.
Oh. I think old is
on the Mercury?
Is a spiritual thing. I was wait, on the Mercury? Yeah, the Mercury looked good, but in terms of age, I think it's a spiritual thing because trust me, I don't know how many times during the Valkyries game, people continue to remind us that Alicia Clark is old, the oldest.
Well, she is the oldest player in the WNBA. So
correct, right? So I was how many times are we going to say this today? We gotta let her go, let her go. On the Sabreena Scales, anything else stood out to you on the scales?
Well, I finally put Connecticut down to 13, which I know people have been clamoring for. So,
dang.
There you go.
That's tough. That's tough. Were you okay? Well, let's talk a little bit about the team that could be 13 that blew that game against the Aces, and I'm talking about the Dallas Wings. Ben, I'm gonna start with you because, oh my God, I thought that Dallas was finally going to get their second win. I thought that they looked decent. I mean, Oh, I really wish Dallas would get a running big. I really do. But overall, I love the way that Arike played. I love the way Paige was playing. I love I don't know. I just thought there was significant um contributions all around. Dejanay was jab stepping, putting up threes. I was like, all right, here we go. But ultimately, Ben, how did that game end? Explain it to
Well,
the viewers.
yeah, I mean, you should say, Zena, you probably loved how all those Dallas Wings players played until the 3:55 mark of the fourth
Yep.
quarter when the game basically flipped. At that point, the Dallas Wings were up 82-71. They were looking very strong. They'd come off one of their best defensive quarters of the season in the third quarter.
Yep.
They held the Las Vegas Aces to just 15 points, really flipping that game. All told, again, we should say Asia Wilson did not play in that game, as Sabreena mentioned. She was in concussion protocol for that Friday night game as well. And then I guess the best way to put it, and Chris Koklanis, their coach, said this afterwards too, in some other words, like everything that happened to kind of lose a game that you need to have happen, like happened. They, I think, committed 7 fouls between the 3:55 mark and I guess the 28-second mark when Jewel Lloyd finally put the Las Vegas Aces ahead. A number of those fouls were offensive fouls. They basically just kept committing fouls and then putting the Aces at the line. And so suddenly, you know, Las Vegas is getting 2 points with the clock stopped. And then next possession down, it'd be, you know, an illegal screen or, you know, like a charge, something like that.
Yeah.
It was just, you know, they really did play like not to lose. Like they slowed their pace down. It was tough. It was I think gutting, you know, it seemed like a real gutting loss for the Dallas Wings because they were so close to picking up their biggest win of the season. And look, they haven't played many close games this year. Like I think that was part of it, but they were disappointed for sure.
Yeah, I was so sad for the Paige Becker's performance to essentially have been wasted in that way. But you have to get these wins. When Asia Wilson isn't playing, you've got to get these wins. These are the opportunities that you cannot squander. And so that was really disappointing. But if anything, hopefully it is encouraging that the Dallas Wings can say, okay, we can be in games with these type of teams. Because Jackie Young and Chelsea Gray, they were playing really well. And so hopefully that's encouraging for them. Let's talk about one more standout that we saw this weekend, Angel Reese. We talked a little bit about her last episode, talking about her needing to play better, which was funny because she got a double-double last week. However, this week she upped the ante, went ahead and got a triple-double, and first triple-double of her career. And she's just winning all around. I mean, she's trademarking a name that was used to troll her in the me bounds. Basically people saying that she gets her own rebounds. She said that she is going to trademark that. We don't know if that's actually going to happen, but that's what she says. Cool. Then she goes and gets a triple-double, runs out of the arena with the W pointing up to her fans. Ben, what's the difference you saw in Angel's game this past weekend?
I mean, I think they're just trying to get her to be more of a facilitator, more of a playmaker on the perimeter. And initially, she kind of talked about it actually a little bit post-game on Sunday that she was a little bit hesitant or not fully understanding, like, why is that kind of the change being made? And there have definitely been a lot of growing pains throughout the first part of this season as she plays more out on the perimeter because she's not really a threat from the three-point line. Like, opponents we see, you know, sagging way off of her, very much living with her taking three-point shots whenever she wants to do it. But we saw, you know, a very good kind of passing, both from the high post, kind of on dribble handoffs. Like I think, you know, the basket, her 10th assist to, Ariel Atkins in the fourth quarter was basically a little bit of a dribble handoff that led to a jumper for Atkins. We saw some of that action. You know, Tyler Marsh said post-game that, like, one of the best attributes or the best attribute for his bigs on Chicago is their passing ability. Now, I think people can really argue with that. I think their rebounding might be the best attribute of that right there. It's pretty good considering the season that Reese had last year. But, like, it's good to see her just be more versatile. And she's saying, like, she wants to continue to be more versatile. So that was a big reason for their success. Also encouraging signs from Haley Van Lith, career high in points. So, you know, I think it's a work in progress for the Sky. Again, they beat the Sun, Sabrina's 13th team, but still, things look pretty, like, as good as they have. Looks like they've certainly recovered a little bit from the Vandersloot ACL tear last week.
And they had a good half against Atlanta in the game before that, too.
Right.
I mean, the game got away from them in the second half, but I thought defensively, they've just looked a lot more coherent over the last couple weeks than they did to start the season. And, we'll see
And
how
that
the
makes
offense
sense.
comes along, but you got to take baby steps.
Right. And I mean, that makes sense with what we were talking about last week about we're seeing this connectivity, and it translates onto the floor, and being able to be connected, communicative, and hold each other accountable. And so you saw a lot of that out on the floor as well. And yes, thank you, Ben, for shouting out Haley Van Lith, 16 points, 5 rebounds, and I think an assist, But yeah, she's playing really well. Shout out to the rookie class. Got to give some love to Pow Pow as well. Liking the way that the rookies are continuing the momentum from the sophomore class, stepping it up, this next class doing the same thing. Before we wrap this, we just want to take a minute to call attention to the horrific news out of Minnesota. I'm sure all of you heard this in some way over the course of the weekend. A gunman allegedly assassinated Minnesota lawmaker Melissa Hortman and her husband, Mark, and after also shooting 2 other people, including another Minnesota lawmaker. First, our condolences to their families and their communities that are mourning them. At their game on Saturday afternoon, the Minnesota Lynx head coach Cheryl Reeves spoke out about this violence, which Governor Tim Walz called an act of targeted political violence. You also had Lynx star Nafisa Collier speaking up too, saying it's a scary time we're living in, honestly. The things that are going on in this country, taking democracy away from the land of the free, that is supposed to be our slogan. When I think about Minnesota, and I think about the WNBA particularly, but WNBA has always been a league that leads by example. They've been always at the forefront of activism, players and coaches using their voices to speak up and out against injustices and wrongdoings. I'll never forget Maya Moore, Rebecca Brunson being the captains of the team that spoke out when Philando Castile was murdered in his car by a police officer. And they started this campaign that other athletes were inspired by. Cheryl Reeves has always been someone that's very outspoken, from Black Lives Matter to the inclusion of trans athlete. Sabreena, I'm sure you remember 2016 as well. And is this something that could launch something new in the midst of everything? Is the WNBA going to have to come out to the forefront again? What are you expecting to come out of this?
Well, I think the Lynx have just historically been an organization that takes its community very seriously and speaks on behalf of what they believe is right. You mentioned the 2016 protests where 4 of them came out in a press conference wearing shirts protesting police brutality, and the security officers actually walked out of that game, at the Lynx game, because of that protest. So it's not something that's done lightly. Obviously, it's something that has potentially serious ramifications. Maya Moore obviously ends her basketball career, to pursue social justice in the forms of, the wrongful conviction of her now husband. And Cheryl Reeve, as you mentioned, like her shirts, she's always speaking on behalf of whether it is trans athletes or Black Lives Matter or, the political climate in the United States. It's just they had a moment of silence actually for George Floyd earlier this year on the 5th anniversary of his killing by police brutality. So I think this is just something that is firmly within the fabric of the Minnesota Lynx organization, helmed by Cheryl Reeve. And it is not surprising at all that they would continue to speak on behalf of what they believe and what they believe is right. And I think that's going to be the case so long as Cheryl Reeve is a part of that organization, hopefully long after that, because this is just what they have developed in that community and in that organization. I'm not sure that this is going to spark a WNBA-wide thing. I think a lot of other teams and franchises are frankly looks like in a newer space. And, I think about everything that happened in LA this week with the ICE raids, and Lynn Roberts is a new coach here who's just moved, and I don't think really has the same familiarity with what's going on in LA as Cheryl Reeve does in Minnesota, who's been there for over a decade. The sparks in Lynn Roberts' statements on behalf of what was happening in the Los Angeles community are a lot less strong, I would say, than what was happening in Minnesota. And, there's a different amount of investment, for how long they've been here, and just understanding of what's going on. But I think Minnesota is the team that you look for to take the lead. I'm not sure that every other WNBA team is positioned to follow in that lead necessarily, but I am continuously impressed by what Cheryl Reeve and that team do, and it was heartening to see that yet again on a really, really sad day in Minnesota.
For sure. I very much give kudos to the Minnesota Lynx for just always being the leaders in that category. And it's interesting, as you mentioned, Lynn Roberts, I just immediately think about the Utah incident that happened during their NCAA run, in which her team experienced, a racial interaction that she said scared her team. I don't remember the exact details, but perhaps something like that, and the memory of something like that may inspire her to continue to speak out for her team, for her community. But we shall see. Shout out to the Minnesota Lynx. And again, our thoughts are with the Minnesota community. All right, let's switch gears a bit. We do have an interview with Shana Stephenson, one of the women behind Ellie the Elephant. Stay tuned.
We are joined by Shana Stephenson. She is the Chief Brand Officer of the New York Liberty, a native New Yorker. Shana's been with the team since 2018. She was honored among Ad Age's leading women in 2024, Crane New York's list of notable 2023 Black leaders. But one of her biggest claims to fame has been turning a simple elephant mascot into a cultural phenomenon. That's just one of the things we're going to talk about today. So Shana, welcome to No Off Season.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be here and chat all things Ellie and whatever else you want to get into.
The mascot obviously has become so synonymous with the franchise's brand, Ellie the Elephant. Prior to moving to Barclays Center, it was Maddie, a golden retriever in kind of the past iteration of the franchise, back when the team played at Madison Square Garden. Just what can you tell people about the origins of Ellie? How did you settle on Ellie the name? How did you settle on it being an elephant? When did you realize you kind of wanted a change and this to be the figure to
Yeah.
represent so much of the team?
So it was a process. You mentioned Maddie, our beloved golden retriever, who was named after Madison Square Garden. So understanding Maddie's origin story, it was really clear early on that Maddie could not come with us to Brooklyn and Barclays Center just because of, her origin story. And so we started ideating, Kia and I started ideating around what this new iteration of a mascot could be, should be in Brooklyn. And, we brainstormed a ton of ideas, including another dog, but just renaming the dog Barkley after Barclays Center, right? But we felt that that was too easy. It was kind of a lazy approach. And we just recognized like this is an opportunity for us to really do something monumental. We also knew that we had to get it right. Because of the transition that we were in, we had lost about 70% of our core fan base through that transition. And we were nervous about the move to Brooklyn because even though it's still within the 5 boroughs and it was, great for us to relocate back into the boroughs, that not all Manhattanites or New Yorkers go to Brooklyn. Not all Brooklynites come to Manhattan all the time. And so there was still like a lot of education and apprehension around how can we reconnect with our lapsed fans and them already feeling an injustice around the way that the Liberty were treated. We knew that as the people leading the brand and driving this next iteration or the next era of the New York Liberty, that it was really important for us to not screw this up. Like we had to get this right. And Ellie was so beloved by, our Liberty loyals, our day one fans, that we had to show respect to Ellie and how we sunset her, right? And so with that, we came up with a story once we decided on the mascot, and I'm like taking a roundabout way to tell the story. But once we landed on a mascot and how we were going to roll Ellie out, we knew that we had to say goodbye to Maddie in a way that our fans understood why this was happening, but also recognize like we still love and respect who Maddie was, but it's time for a new day, a new era. So with Ellie, after us considering a dog, a pigeon, a rat, debating if it needed to be a person, could it be an inanimate object, Kia, Googled late one night animals in Brooklyn and came across a story about the Brooklyn Bridge and how there were a lot of concerns about was it sturdy, was it durable, was it strong enough to withstand all of the traffic and the weight, that it would experience on a day-to-day basis. And there is this, as legend tells it, P.T. Barnum and Bailey created a stunt where herds of elephants walked across the bridge to prove that, yes, this is sturdy, it is strong, it can withstand the weight. And I remember at the time we were in Westchester and we worked out of a law firm office. And she came into the office that day and she was like, hear me out. I have this idea for a mascot. And I was like, okay, braced myself. And she said, an elephant. And I was like, no. Like there's no
Right.
way. And then she was like, just listen to the story. And then as soon as she told the story, it just made sense. And really, just the synergy and the alignment between an elephant and what an elephant symbolizes, but then elephant and Ellie being short for elephant, but then also thinking about the Statue of Liberty and Ellis Island and what that represents, and us being the New York Liberty, and then also the Brooklyn Bridge as a throughway to get from Manhattan to Brooklyn, and that's, reflective of our journey. So all signs just led to that being the future mascot for the New York Liberty, and we were able to get ownership on board. They really bought into the story and the direction that we were headed. And then the fun really started to begin. Once we identified that it would be an elephant, it was like, okay, what is the personality? How do we go about choosing who will be in the costume? What does Ellie even look like? And so we worked with an artist who had experience designing or sketching mascots and Broadway characters, etc. And they helped us come up with, a more modern take on a mascot. And we also felt it was really important for us to not just do what had already been done before, because you really don't get, as like a legacy franchise that's, an original franchise, you don't get these opportunities to hit the reset button, And so we saw that as like, this is going to be fun. And as someone who's a native New Yorker, I saw it, and a marketer, like this was like the dream job for me, to really take on the responsibility of not only rebranding the team in a new borough, but also introducing this new character, this new mascot that would truly represent the team.
And we should say that's Kahleah Clark, the CEO of the franchise, one of the kind of other minds behind so much of
Yes.
the business side
Yes.
of the team. When you think about just, Ellie's identity, like it's obviously so distinct in a broader sports space, right? It seems like identified very clearly as a feminine mascot, the group of people kind of responsible for styling and marketing, like Black women, it's become this, big cultural icon in the queer community in Brooklyn, and I guess more broadly. Like, how intentional were some of the choices you made or you all made about character development, I guess, outfits, just kind of aura,
Yeah.
swagger, all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, so some of it was intentional from day one and strategic from day one, and then some of it has evolved over time. So when we were initially, creating Ellie or giving birth to Ellie, the character, um, and I was working with the artist, we had to have these conversations. Should Ellie identify as a female mascot, a male mascot, you know, non-binary, and we thought it was important that Ellie be female as a symbol of our team, a representation of our team. We wanted her to align with our players in that way. Also, thinking about Brooklyn and what Brooklyn represents. There's so many languages spoken here. In New York, it's the melting pot of the world, so much diversity, and it's truly reflective of our fan base, right? And we've been extremely intentional with how we've been able to cultivate that fan base. And from the very, very beginning, even though in 2021, we only had about 2,000 or 2,500 fans in the building because we were coming out of the shadows of COVID and dealing with testing and social distancing. And at the time when we introduced Ellie and Timeless Torches came back and, Torch Patrol, our dance teams, they couldn't even perform on the court as we
Right.
know them to perform today because there were so many league restrictions in place to protect the players. So if you weren't part of that tier one group who was getting tested every single day, then you couldn't be on the court. And so we built a stage in one of the end zones of the arena, and that's where Ellie performed. And there's no real way that Ellie can connect with fans. And then when you think about we're in a 17,000, 18,000 person arena and there's only 2,000 people in the building because of, all of these reasons. And so it really Ellie didn't um, really get to showcase who she could be that season. But it was great because she could get a feel for the dancing and just try different things out without, a huge microscope on her. So that was positive. But initially, we were very clear we wanted her to be female. We were very clear that we wanted her to represent Brooklyn. Very clear that we wanted her to, identify and connect with the queer community. And every fan that comes into that building, we want them to see themselves in her. And I love the social media discourse around who's in the costume. Black women claim Ellie, the queer community claims Ellie. Like everyone identifies with her, and it's a true. It's fun for us to see all of the, debates on social media, but it also makes us feel really good because we want our games to feel like everyone belongs there and to feel seen, to feel represented. So that's through the activations and our theme nights. But then Ellie is also another aspect of us being able to deliver that.
It's funny that you say, going back to it, like, the tier one New York Liberty employees, because I think a few years later in 2025, a lot of people would say that Ellie the Elephant is very much a tier one New
Oh,
York Liberty
I
employee.
I would agree.
If anyone should be getting daily testing back then to put on a show, it would be the mascot. But is
I
there a
agree.
moment for you, as we start to close it out, like, is there a moment for you where you stepped back and you said, wow, like this got really big, like way bigger than I expected? A game. I've seen so many
Yeah.
I've seen so many channels. I've seen so many brand partnerships over the years, so many interactions with fans. It's a whole, it's a giant thing right now, obviously. But is there a moment for you where even you were surprised at how big this idea took off?
Yes, I mean, there's several, but I would say one of the earliest moments when I recognized that Ellie wasn't just your average mascot was when Cardi B tweeted about Ellie.
Hmm.
Ellie did one of her, TikTok dances that was trending at the time, and Cardi B saw it and tweeted about it and said something like, um, I can get you the exact headline, but it was like, "Ellie, I just got ate up by an elephant," or something to that effect, and then Billboard covered the story or covered Cardi talking
Right.
about Ellie, and I was like, "Whoa." So that blew my mind, and then, then there were just, like, certain, um entertainment blogs that started to pick up Ellie's halftime performances or little like TikTok dances that she was doing. And I would just be scrolling in my feed and start to see Ellie content that we didn't plant or post. And, it's like, oh, everyone is picking up on this. And so
Right.
that was one of the first moments for me. And then when we introduced the Ellie braid, that became a trend and that took off in its own way. And then, every season there's something new and different about Ellie. And then obviously the fashion and her, being invited to walk the red carpet at Glamour's Women of the Year Awards, Vogue covering Ellie. Ellie's done so many features across all of the major women's fashion publications. And it's like, again, Ellie being in spaces, being invited into spaces and places that you would not expect a mascot to be seen in. There was a time when these publications weren't even covering women athletes, right? So for them to now be covering the mascot of a women's professional sports team, it really shows the impact that Ellie has had. Obviously, the growth of women's sports, but also the impact that Ellie has had, and then also, you mentioned like brands and partnerships, and um, this season her partnership with Essie and us introducing, gel nails on Ellie, So it's
Right.
like it's been fun to just experiment and try new things and be innovative, but also I love that we have partners that also embrace thinking outside of the box and who want to work with us and want to dream up these crazy ideas of ways that we can continue to push the limit of what, a traditional mascot is known for.
When you talk about pushing the limit, like, how much did Ellie influence how you guys kind of bring in a fan base? Or just can you kind of reflect on the approach to bringing in that fan base? You touched on it a little bit, but obviously New York Liberty Games, they, are a super inclusive environment, right? You very much like, welcoming in people in the queer community who might traditionally be boxed out of some sports spaces or male sports spaces. Um, are those things, did those ideas kind of work along a parallel path? Or, frankly, like the Liberty fan base is different than the Nets fan base, right?
Yeah.
And the energy in the arenas are very different.
Yeah.
How did you kind of think about that connection of the in-arena environment and connection with the community in Brooklyn?
Well, we knew that we wanted it to be a party and we wanted people to have fun. It's I say this a lot, but regardless of the score, up by 20, down by 20, I want people to leave feeling like, wow, that was a really great experience. But for me, it starts with the players. Like the strategy is all built around the players and their identities and making sure that they feel seen and represented and having a building and a fan base that reflects who they are on the court as well, and who can celebrate and champion who they are, and uplift them in that way. And I think that we've been able to successfully do that also because of our leadership team and what we look like, and Kahleah Clark being really intentional about, hiring people that our players are able to identify with, but also identify with these diverse communities that we serve. And, we're out in the community. Our mascot and their team are out in the community. So it all is really authentic to who we are. We're not, delivering an experience or executing on activations that we don't truly believe in or taking on partnerships that feel inauthentic to who we are. We really want to make sure that we represent our community and our fans, and our players in the most positive way. And it's a lot of it's very meaningful to us, and we
Sure.
see that as a responsibility. And so our strategy is about that, but then also about tapping into, as I mentioned before, like the cultural touch points of who New York is at the heart and soul of the city.
Shana Stephenson, we appreciate you taking some time talking about the mascot and the brand and joining us on No Off Season.
Thanks for having me.
All right, folks. Shout out to Big Ellie. I love that they have created this mascot in New York. And I particularly love the competition from all the other teams to try and catch up. All these new mascots popping up, all the older mascots trying to show out. I don't know. Big Ellie kind of takes the cake, but we'll see. I'm excited to keep the competition going. On that note, we got another rendition of one of our favorite games, Two Takes and a Fake. And this time, it's coming from me. So, Sabreena, Ben, you guys work together to figure out which one of my takes are real, two of them, and one that's fake. All right, let's get going. My first take is Brianna Jones is going to be in the top 10 shooting bigs in the WNBA by the end of the season. My second take is that Natalie Nakase will win Coach of the Year in the WNBA. And my third take is the Las Vegas Aces will make a move at trade deadline. Which one of my fakes or my takes is real or fake?
When you say best shooting bigs in the WNBA, is that like a qualitative thing? Like, or is there a number you're pointing out to? Like, what are we what are we referring to here?
I'm thinking like if you rank all the centers in the league, she'll be in the top 10. I don't know what that number will be, but she'll be in the top 10.
Okay. I'm not even sure I'd call her center this year, but that's fine.
Fair, that's fair. Or forward, a center forward.
I think we can safely say that Natalie Nakasi being coach of the year is a Zena take that it's real.
Certainly the logic is aligns with Zena's past history about the Golden State Valkyries. I personally don't believe that as it's going to come to fruition, but I think Zena can certainly, you can make a case she believes it.
Okay. So we think
aligned there.
Between Bree Jones and Vegas, right? Okay, so she thinks the Aces will make a move at the trade deadline. Now, that kind of relies on the Aces having a general manager to make moves at the trade deadline, which that seems like more of a hang-up for me than Zena, though, I gotta tell you. What do you think, Ben?
Well, I think we know that the Aces are, I mean, we've seen it, sniffing around at trying to improve their roster. We've already seen, them make a change in terms of Crystal Bradford getting released and bringing in Joyner Holmes. It wouldn't be shocking if, we saw future transactions like that down the line as they try and sort out their bench. So I think it's a pretty plausible, for that to happen, Sabreena.
I think that they're going to be 10 shooting bigs who are better than Bree Jones, frankly. What do her numbers look like right now? Just real quick. Bree
Jones, we should say, as you look this up, should be an all-star. People 100%. Who are voting, she should be an all-star for the Atlanta Dream this year. That's another take. I'll throw that one out.
17% of her threes on 1.7 attempts per game. It doesn't seem to me like top 10.
That does not seem to be top 10 to me, Sabreena.
I don't love it.
I think we've settled on this
one. I think we settled. All right, that's our fake, Zena.
Okay, correct. However, I think it is worth saying that she's 3 of 18, I think, right now on the season.
Attempts. Yeah.
And that is in just this portion of the season. That's more threes than she took all year. Last year, she took 14 threes. She's already taken 18 through 9 or 10 games. So shout out to Brianna Jones and Carl Smesko for his system. Clearly that she is playing within and shooting more threes. But yeah, I do think that Natalie Nakasi will win Coach of the Year. And I do think that the Las Vegas Aces will make a move. They need to, because I am tired of seeing how frustrated A'ja Wilson looks every time she gets out on the court. But that is just my opinion. Great job, guys. And I didn't know that you guys were going to look up Brianna Jones's 3-point percentage. I thought we were going to keep it right here.
You had to expect it. You had to expect it on this show. We're well researched.
I feel like it's a little bit of cheating, but it's fair. But yeah, I think your logic with Las Vegas, you're absolutely right. Having a GM is more of your concern, Sabreena, than it is mine. They're gonna have to figure it out. If Becky Hammon has to get on the phone, sis. Okay, we got to figure it out for the Aces, because we can't have A'ja Wilson. Did y'all see how stressed she looked at that game in the suite? I don't even know what game she was at. Yeah, she was sitting in the box, sunglasses on, trying to heal from this concussion. She's going through it, folks. Again, this is just my opinion. This is not me actually talking to her and knowing. But great job, guys. Great job, Ben and Sabreena. Hope you guys got it at home as well. That is all for today. Join us on Friday, where we're going to have some early thoughts for you on our All-Star picks. I hope you're getting your voting in. And before we go, quick reminder, subscribe to this show wherever you're listening. Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, wherever, in your bathroom. Do it right now. Leave us a comment, write us an email, reach out on social media. We love to hear from you guys. And of course, heading on over to our partner at the Yahoo Sports Hub for more content. It's sports.yahoo.com/women's-sports. On behalf of The Athletic, I'm Zena Keita. Appreciate you guys listening, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for tuning in to No Off Season. To hear more, be sure to like and subscribe. We drop new episodes every Tuesday and Friday.